The sun was setting over the small town of Oak Ridge, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. It was a typical evening for General Marcus Reed, a decorated Army officer who had served his country with distinction for over 2 decades. Returning home from a day of meetings at the nearby military base, he stopped at a local gas station to fill up his car. Little did he know that this mundane errand would spiral into an incident that would make national headlines. General Reed was a man of discipline and honor. He had spent most of his life in service, rising through the ranks to become one of the most respected figures in the U.S. Army. His uniform, adorned with medals and badges earned through years of sacrifice, told the story of his dedication. But on this particular evening, none of that mattered. What happened next was something no one could have predicted. As General Reed stepped out of his vehicle, an unmarked black SUV screeched to a halt beside him. The sudden noise startled him, and he turned to see what was happening. Out jumped Agent Daniel Hayes, a seasoned FBI agent known for his sharp instincts and, unfortunately, his deeply ingrained prejudices. Hayes was a man who prided himself on his ability to read people quickly, but his judgment was often clouded by biases he refused to acknowledge. Without warning or explanation, Hayes barked orders at Reed, demanding identification. His tone was aggressive, leaving no room for questions. Confused but calm, the general complied, showing both his military ID and driver's license. He figured there must be some misunderstanding, a routine check perhaps. But instead of diffusing the situation, Hayes grew more agitated when he saw Reed's uniform and dark skin. Hayes's face twisted in anger as racial slurs slipped past his lips. "What are you doing dressed like that?" he spat, pointing a yai finger at Reed. "You think you can just walk around pretending to be someone important? Show me your real ID." Reed's heart sank as he realized what was happening. This wasn't about mistaken identity or a simple misunderstanding. This was about prejudice, plain and simple. Despite the sinking feeling in his stomach, Reed remained composed. His years of training kicked in, teaching him not to escalate the situation further. In a calm yet firm voice, he replied, "Agent Hayes, I am a U.S. Army general. I have no idea why you are treating me like a criminal." But Hayes wasn't listening. His mind was made up before he even approached Reed. To him, the sight of a black man in a high-ranking military uniform was suspicious. He couldn't fathom how someone who looked like Reed could hold such a prestigious position. His prejudice blinded him to reason, and his anger only grew. Before anyone could intervene, Hayes drew his gun and pointed it directly at the unarmed general. The tension hung thick in the air, and time seemed to freeze. Customers at the gas station froze mid-motion, unsure of what to do. Some dropped their shopping baskets and scrambled for cover, while others pulled out their phones to record the unfolding drama. Gas station attendant Lisa Martinez stood frozen behind the counter, her hands trembling as she watched the scene unfold through the store's large glass windows. Reed locked eyes with Hayes, trying to gauge whether the agent was truly capable of pulling the trigger. He had faced danger countless times during his military career, but this was different. This wasn't combat. This was hatred masquerading as authority. Still, he refused to let fear take over. Instead, he spoke again, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Agent Hayes," he said, "you're making a mistake. Lower your weapon and let's talk this through." Hayes ignored him, his finger hovering dangerously close to the trigger. Just then, a young soldier named Tyler Jenkins, who happened to be refueling his truck nearby, recognized General Reed. Jenkins immediately sprang into action, shouting at Hayes to lower his weapon. When Hayes ignored him, Jenkins called 911, reporting the incident and providing crucial details about what was happening. Within minutes, local police arrived on the scene. They were shocked to find an FBI agent holding a high-ranking military official at gunpoint without any apparent cause. The officers cautiously approached Hayes, ordering him to holster his weapon. Reluctantly, Hayes obeyed, but his venomous glare never left Reed's face. The standoff may have ended, but the damage was done. News of the incident spread quickly, thanks to the bystanders who recorded everything on their phones. By the time Reed returned home that night, videos of the confrontation were already circulating online. Social media erupted with outrage, and hashtags like Trichas Justice for Reed began trending nationwide. Despite the chaos surrounding him, Reed tried to focus on the bigger picture. He knew that reacting impulsively wouldn't solve anything. Instead, he decided to cooperate fully with investigators, hoping that justice would prevail. Deep down, however, he couldn't shake the feeling that this incident was symptomatic of a larger problem, one that went far beyond a single rogue agent. That night, as Reed sat alone in his living room, replaying the events in his mind, he felt a mix of emotions. There was anger, yes, but also sadness and disappointment. He had dedicated his life to serving a nation that promised equality and justice for all. Yet here he was, facing discrimination from someone who was supposed to uphold those very ideals. Little did Reed know that this was only the beginning. The fallout from the incident would spark a nationwide conversation about racism and accountability within law enforcement. For now, though, all he could do was wait and hope that the truth would come to light. As he drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered in his mind. If something like this could happen to him, a decorated Army general, what hope did ordinary citizens have? The stage was set for a battle that would test the limits of justice and expose the deep-rooted flaws in the system. And at the center of it all stood General Marcus Reed, a man whose courage and resilience would inspire millions. The gas station in Oak Ridge, once a quiet and unremarkable place, had become the center of a national storm. The standoff between General Marcus Reed and FBI agent Daniel Hayes was far from over, but its impact was already spreading like wildfire. Bystanders who had witnessed the incident firsthand couldn't believe what they had just seen. Some were shaken, others outraged, and a few were simply too stunned to react. For many, it was hard to reconcile the image of a decorated Army general being treated like a criminal by someone sworn to protect the law. As the local police arrived, the scene became even more chaotic. Officers quickly assessed the situation, their faces etched with confusion and disbelief. They recognized General Reed immediately. His uniform and demeanor left no doubt about his identity. But seeing an FBI agent pointing a gun at him? That was something none of them had ever imagined possible. One officer, Sergeant Laura Bennett, stepped forward cautiously, her voice firm but calm. "Agent Hayes," she said, "lower your weapon. This is not protocol." Hayes hesitated for a moment, his grip tightening on the gun. His eyes darted between Reed and the growing crowd of onlookers. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reluctantly lowered his weapon and holstered it, but his body language remained tense, and his expression was one of simmering resentment. It was clear that Hayes wasn't backing down because he realized he was wrong. He was doing it because he had no other choice. Meanwhile, Tyler Jenkins, the young soldier who had intervened earlier, approached the officers. He introduced himself and explained what he had witnessed. "General Reed is a respected leader in the Army," Jenkins said, his voice filled with urgency. "He didn't do anything wrong." Agent Hayes pulled his gun out of nowhere and started shouting racial slurs. "I recorded part of it on my phone. I can show you." Jenkins' words sent shockwaves through the group of officers. Racial slurs? An FBI agent using such language against a high-ranking military official? It sounded almost unbelievable. But when Jenkins played the video on his phone, the evidence was undeniable. The footage showed Hayes yelling at Reed, his tone hostile, and his words laced with venom. The officers exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just a case of misconduct, it was a blatant abuse of power fueled by prejudice. Sergeant Bennett wasted no time. She called for backup and requested that higher authorities be notified immediately. Within minutes, state troopers and federal investigators began arriving at the scene. The gas station, which had been bustling with activity just moments ago, now resembled a crime scene. Yellow tape was stretched around the perimeter, and reporters started showing up, eager to get a glimpse of what was happening. Back inside the gas station, Lisa Martinez, the attendant, was still trying to process everything. Her hands trembled as she recounted the events to an investigator. "I've worked here for years," she said softly, "and I've never seen anything like this. That FBI guy, he just lost it. He didn't even ask questions before pulling his gun. And the way he talked to General Reed, it was awful. Martinez's testimony added another layer to the unfolding drama. Like Jenkins, she confirmed that Hayes had used racial slurs and acted aggressively without provocation. Her account painted a vivid picture of Hayes' erratic behavior and the fear he had instilled in everyone present. Investigators took detailed notes, knowing that every piece of evidence would be crucial in determining the truth. While all this was happening, General Reed stood quietly to the side, observing the commotion with a mixture of calmness and frustration. He knew that the attention surrounding him was necessary, but it also weighed heavily on his shoulders. As a man who had spent decades serving his country, he understood the importance of accountability. Yet he couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. How could someone in a position of authority act so recklessly? And how many others had faced similar treatment but never had the chance to speak up? As the night wore on, news of the incident spread rapidly. Social media platforms lit up with posts and videos captured by bystanders. Hashtags like Trish Justice for Reed and Trish Racism in law enforcement trended nationwide. People from all walks of life expressed their outrage, sharing stories of their own encounters with bias and discrimination. Civil rights organizations issued statements condemning Hayes' actions and calling for transparency within federal law enforcement agencies. By morning, the story had reached mainstream media outlets. News anchors discussed the incident during primetime broadcasts, while newspapers ran front-page headlines about the confrontation. Politicians weighed in, demanding answers and accountability. Senators and representatives from both sides of the aisle condemned Hayes' behavior, emphasizing the need for reform within law enforcement. The FBI, meanwhile, found itself under intense scrutiny. Initially, the Bureau tried to downplay the incident, issuing a vague statement about an internal investigation. But public pressure mounted, forcing them to take swift action. Hayes was placed on administrative leave pending further review, and a team of independent investigators was assigned to look into the matter. For General Reed, the aftermath of the incident was both overwhelming and surreal. Friends, colleagues, and strangers flooded his phone with messages of support. Military leaders reached out to express their solidarity, assuring him that he was not alone in this fight. Even members of Congress contacted him, offering to assist in any way they could. Despite the outpouring of kindness, Reed couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than him. It wasn't just about holding Hayes accountable. It was about addressing the systemic issues that allowed such behavior to occur in the first place. Over the next few days, Reed cooperated fully with investigators, recounting every detail of the encounter. He provided documentation proving his identity and rank, leaving no room for doubt about who he was. He also shared his thoughts on how the incident reflected broader societal challenges. "This isn't just about me," he told one investigator. "It's about ensuring that no one else has to go through something like this. We need to hold people accountable, yes, but we also need to educate and train them so they understand the harm caused by prejudice." As the investigation progressed, more witnesses came forward, each adding to the mountain of evidence against Hayes. Some described how Hayes had ignored protocol and endangered lives by escalating the situation unnecessarily. Others highlighted his refusal to listen to reason, even when confronted with facts. Every new piece of information painted a clearer picture of a man whose biases had overridden his judgment. Despite the mounting evidence, Hayes' supporters attempted to defend him. They claimed he was under extreme stress and had misinterpreted the situation due to incomplete information. However, these arguments fell flat in the face of undeniable proof. Videos, testimonies, and expert analyses all pointed to one conclusion. Hayes had acted out of prejudice, and his actions were inexcusable. As the nation waited for justice to be served, the incident sparked important conversations about racism and accountability. Schools, workplaces, and community organizations held discussions about how to combat bias and promote equality. People began to reflect on their own behaviors and attitudes, realizing that change had to start at the individual level. For General Reed, the experience was transformative. While he had always believed in the values of fairness and justice, This incident reinforced his commitment to fighting for those principles. He vowed to use his platform to advocate for meaningful change, hoping that his story would inspire others to stand up against injustice wherever they saw it. And so, as the sun rose over Oak Ridge once again, the town and the nation found itself grappling with uncomfortable truths. The standoff at the gas station may have lasted only a few tense minutes, but its ripple effects would be felt for years to come. It was a stark reminder that courage, integrity, and accountability are essential, not just in moments of crisis, but in shaping a fairer, more equitable world. The days following the incident at the gas station were a whirlwind of activity. The story of FBI agent Daniel Hayes pointing a gun at General Marcus Reed had captured the nation's attention, and the pressure to deliver justice was immense. For General Reed, life became a blur of interviews, meetings with investigators, and public appearances. He handled it all with grace and composure, but privately, he felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about him. It was about setting an example for future generations. The FBI, under intense scrutiny, launched a full-scale internal investigation into the matter. At first, they tried to downplay the severity of the incident, issuing vague statements about reviewing the situation. But as more evidence surfaced, videos, eyewitness accounts, and expert testimonies, the Bureau had no choice but to take decisive action. Public outrage forced their hand. Protesters gathered outside FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., holding signs that read, "Accountability now," and "No justice, no peace." Politicians from both sides of the aisle demanded answers, and civil rights organizations threatened lawsuits if the agency didn't act swiftly. Agent Hayes, meanwhile, found himself in a precarious position. Suspended from duty pending the outcome of the investigation, he retreated from public view. Rumors swirled about his mental state. Some claimed he was deeply remorseful, while others said he remained defiant, blaming everyone but himself for the fallout. His colleagues distanced themselves, fearing association with someone who had become a symbol of everything wrong with law enforcement. Hayes's once promising career now hung by a thread. General Reed played a pivotal role in ensuring transparency throughout the process. He cooperated fully with investigators, providing detailed accounts of what happened that night. He also shared his thoughts on how such incidents could be prevented in the future. During one interview, Reed emphasized the importance of training and accountability within federal agencies. "We need to recognize that bias exists," he said thoughtfully. "It doesn't mean we're bad people, but it does mean we have work to do. We must root out prejudice wherever we find it." As the investigation unfolded, damning evidence against Hayes continued to pile up. Body camera footage from the responding police officers revealed not only Hayes's use of racial slurs, but also his blatant disregard for protocol. Witnesses like Lisa Martinez, the gas station attendant, provided vivid descriptions of Hayes's erratic behavior. Tyler Jenkins, the young soldier who had intervened, offered compelling testimony about how Hayes ignored warnings and escalated the situation unnecessarily. Even experts in law enforcement ethics weighed in, calling Hayes's actions unforgivable and a betrayal of public trust. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Hayes's defense team attempted to paint him as a victim of circumstance. They argued that he was under extreme stress and misinterpreted the situation due to incomplete information. They claimed that his actions, though regrettable, did not warrant criminal charges. However, these arguments fell flat in the court of public opinion. Videos of the confrontation went viral, leaving little room for doubt about Hayes's motives. Social media users dissected every frame, pointing out inconsistencies in Hayes's version of events. Memes mocking his excuses flooded platforms like Twitter and Instagram, further eroding any sympathy he might have garnered. The case eventually made its way to federal prosecutors, who decided to press charges against Hayes. He faced multiple counts, including assault with a deadly weapon, racial profiling, and conduct unbecoming of a federal officer. The decision to pursue criminal charges sent shockwaves through law enforcement circles. Never before had an FBI agent been charged so severely for misconduct involving a fellow government official. It was a bold move, signaling a shift toward greater accountability within federal agencies. For General Reed, the legal proceedings were emotionally taxing. He knew that testifying in court would mean reliving the trauma of that night, but he also understood the importance of his testimony. When the trial date was set, Reed prepared himself mentally and physically. Friends and family rallied around him, offering words of encouragement and support. Military leaders, too, expressed solidarity, vowing to stand by him throughout the process. On the day of the trial, the courtroom was packed with spectators, reporters, and activists. Cameras lined the hallways outside, capturing every moment as participants entered and exited. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Prosecutors laid out their case methodically, presenting video evidence, witness testimonies, and expert analyses. They painted Hayes as a man whose biases had blinded him to reason, leading him to commit an egregious abuse of power. Defense attorneys countered by attempting to cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative. They questioned the credibility of witnesses and argued that Hayes's actions were a result of confusion rather than malice. However, their efforts proved futile. The mountain of evidence against Hayes was insurmountable. Even the judge, known for her impartiality, appeared visibly frustrated by the defense's attempts to deflect blame. When it came time for General Reed to take the stand, the entire courtroom fell silent. All eyes were on him as he walked to the witness box, his military uniform crisp and polished. He swore to tell the truth, then began recounting the events of that fateful evening. His voice was steady, his words measured, yet there was an undeniable emotion behind them. "I've dedicated my life to serving this country," he said, pausing briefly to collect himself. "I fought for freedom and equality, not just for myself but for everyone. What happened that night wasn't just an attack on me, it was an attack on those values." Reed's testimony struck a chord with everyone in the room. Jurors exchanged glances, clearly moved by his words. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, capturing every detail. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered, listening to live updates via megaphones. Many held banners reading, "Stand with Reed," and "Justice for all." It was clear that this trial was about more than just one man. It was about holding institutions accountable and demanding change. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in applause as Hayes was handcuffed and led away. Judge Evelyn Carter delivered a stern sentence, ordering Hayes to serve 5 years in federal prison. In her closing remarks, she emphasized the importance of accountability in maintaining trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. "This case is a reminder," she said firmly, "that no one is above the law, not even those tasked with enforcing it." The verdict brought a mix of emotions for General Reed. Relief washed over him knowing that justice had been served. But there was also sadness as he reflected on the broader implications of the incident. This wasn't just about punishing one individual, it was about addressing the systemic issues that allowed such behavior to occur in the first place. In Diertzen, the weeks following the trial, the FBI announced sweeping reforms aimed at combating bias and improving accountability. Mandatory diversity training programs were implemented, and stricter oversight measures were put in place to prevent similar incidents in the future. While some criticized these changes as being too little, too late, others saw them as a step in the right direction. For General Reed, the experience was transformative. He emerged from the ordeal stronger and more determined than ever to fight for justice. He became a vocal advocate for reform, speaking at conferences and participating in initiatives aimed at bridging divides between different segments of society. Despite the trauma he endured, Reed chose forgiveness over bitterness, hoping his story would inspire others to confront injustice wherever they found it. As the dust settled, and life slowly returned to normal, the nation took stock of what had happened. The standoff at the gas station may have lasted only a few tense minutes, but its impact would be felt for years to come. It reminded everyone that courage, integrity, and accountability are essential, not just in moments of crisis, but in shaping a fairer, more equitable world. And as people moved forward, they carried with them the lessons learned from a true life story that began with fear and ended with hope. The trial of FBI agent Daniel Hayes was unlike anything the nation had seen in recent memory. It wasn't just a courtroom drama. It was a referendum on accountability, prejudice, and the trust between law enforcement and the communities they served. For weeks leading up to the trial, the country buzzed with anticipation. Protesters gathered outside courthouses across the nation, holding signs that read, "Justice for General Reed," and "No Racism in Uniform." Social media platforms were flooded with hashtags like "On, Hold Them Accountable," and "Our Systemic Change Now." People from all walks of life, students, teachers, veterans, activists, and everyday citizens, were united by a shared hope that this case would set a precedent for how institutions dealt with misconduct. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Every seat was filled, and reporters jostled for space near the front rows, scribbling notes furiously as proceedings began. On one side sat General Marcus Reed, flanked by his legal team and supporters. His presence commanded respect. Even those who didn't know him personally could sense his dignity and strength. On the other side sat Agent Hayes, his shoulders slumped, his face pale but defiant. He rarely made eye contact with anyone, preferring instead to stare at the floor or glance furtively at his defense attorneys. The prosecution wasted no time laying out their case. They presented a mountain of evidence: videos recorded by bystanders, body camera footage from responding police officers, and detailed testimonies from witnesses like Lisa Martinez and Tyler Jenkins. Each piece of evidence painted a damning picture of Hayes' actions. In one video shown during the trial, Hayes could be heard shouting racial slurs and accusing Reed of impersonating an officer, all without any provocation. Another clip showed him drawing his gun and pointing it directly at Reed, ignoring the pleas of Jenkins and others to lower his weapon. Prosecutors argued that Hayes' behavior was not just reckless, but deeply rooted in prejudice. "This isn't about a simple misunderstanding," said lead prosecutor Sarah Klein during her opening statement. "This is about a man who let his biases override his training, his judgment, and his duty to uphold the law. What happened that night was an abuse of power, a betrayal of everything we expect from those entrusted to protect us." Hayes' defense team fought back fiercely, attempting to cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative. They claimed that Hayes had been under extreme stress and misinterpreted the situation due to incomplete information. They suggested that Reed's uniform might have confused him, implying that Hayes thought he was dealing with someone pretending to be a high-ranking official. Defense attorney Mark Turner argued, "My client made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but he is not a racist. He acted based on what he believed was necessary in the moment." But these arguments fell flat in the face of overwhelming evidence. Witnesses testified about Hayes' use of derogatory language and his refusal to listen, to reason. Expert witnesses, including psychologists and law enforcement trainers, explained how bias can cloud judgment and lead to dangerous escalations. Even some of Hayes' former colleagues took the stand, reluctantly admitting that they had witnessed similar behavior from him in the past. One colleague described Hayes as having a chip on his shoulder when it came to people of color, though they admitted they hadn't reported it because they feared retaliation. At the heart of the trial was General Reed himself. When he finally took the stand, the entire courtroom leaned forward, eager to hear his account. Dressed in his immaculate military uniform, Reed exuded calmness and authority. As he recounted the events of that night, his voice remained steady, though there was an undeniable emotion behind his words. "I've spent my life serving this country," he said, looking directly at the jury. "I've faced danger in combat zones, but nothing prepared me for what happened that evening. I was treated like a criminal, not because of something I did, but because of who I am." Reed went on to describe how Hayes' actions had shaken him, not just personally, but professionally. "As a soldier, I believe in discipline, honor, and fairness," he continued. "What happened that night violated every principle I hold dear. But this isn't just about me. It's about ensuring that no one else has to endure such treatment simply because of their race or background." His testimony left a profound impact on everyone in the room. Jurors exchanged glances, visibly moved by his words. Reporters scrambled to capture every detail, knowing that Reed's statement would dominate headlines the next day. Outside the courthouse, crowds erupted in applause when news of his testimony spread. For many, Reed wasn't just a victim, he was a symbol of resilience and hope. As the trial progressed, it became increasingly clear that Hayes would struggle to escape conviction. The prosecution's case was airtight, supported by irrefutable evidence and compelling testimonies. Still, Hayes's defense team clung to their narrative, attempting to portray him as a flawed but ultimately well-meaning individual. They called character witnesses, including friends and family members who spoke of Hayes's dedication to his job and his commitment to public service. But these efforts only seemed to highlight the disconnect between the man they described and the actions he had taken. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in cheers as Hayes was handcuffed and led away. Judge Evelyn Carter delivered a stern sentence, ordering him to serve 5 years in federal prison. In her closing remarks, she emphasized the gravity of his crimes. "This case is a reminder," she said firmly, "that no one is above the law, not even those tasked with enforcing it. Your actions that night were not only illegal, but deeply harmful. You betrayed the trust placed in you by the public, and you must now face the consequences." The verdict brought a mix of emotions for General Reed. Relief washed over him, knowing that justice had been served. But there was also sadness as he reflected on the broader implications of the incident. This wasn't just about punishing one individual. It was about addressing the systemic issues that allowed such behavior to occur in the first place. As he left the courthouse surrounded by supporters, Reed paused briefly to address the crowd. "Today we celebrate accountability," he said. "But our work is far from over. We must continue fighting for a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." In the weeks following the trial, the fallout reverberated across the nation. The FBI announced sweeping reforms aimed at combating bias and improving accountability within its ranks. Mandatory diversity training programs were implemented, and stricter oversight measures were put in place to prevent similar incidents in the future. While some criticized these changes as insufficient, others saw them as a step in the right direction. For Hayes, life behind bars was a stark contrast to the career he once cherished. From his cell, he began writing letters expressing regret for his actions. Some doubted the sincerity of his remorse, viewing it as an attempt to salvage his reputation. Others, however, saw it as a sign that he was beginning to confront the harm he had caused. Whether genuine or not, Hayes's fall from grace served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that unchecked prejudice can destroy lives and careers. Meanwhile, General Reed emerged from the ordeal stronger and more determined than ever to fight for justice. He became a vocal advocate for reform, speaking at conferences and participating in initiatives aimed at bridging divides between different segments of society. Despite the trauma he endured, Reed chose forgiveness over bitterness, hoping his story would inspire others to confront injustice wherever they found it. As the dust settled and life slowly returned to normal, the nation took stock of what had happened. The standoff at the gas station may have lasted only a few tense minutes, but its impact would be felt for years to come. It reminded everyone that courage, integrity, and accountability are essential, not just in moments of crisis, but in shaping a fairer, more equitable world. And as people moved forward, they carried with them the lessons learned from a true life story that began with fear and ended with hope. The trial of FBI agent Daniel Hayes had come to an end, but its effects rippled far beyond the courtroom walls. For General Marcus Reed, the verdict brought a sense of closure, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by advocacy, reflection, and hope for systemic change. The nation, too, found itself grappling with uncomfortable truths about racism, accountability, and the need for reform within institutions meant to protect and serve. In the months following the trial, Reed became a prominent figure in conversations about racial justice and equality. He traveled across the country, speaking at universities, community centers, and military bases. His speeches were not just about his personal experience. They were calls to action. "What happened to me was wrong," he often said, "but I'm not unique." Every day people face discrimination because of their race, gender, or background. My story is just one example of why we need to do better. Reed's message resonated deeply with audiences. Veterans admired his courage and commitment to service, while activists saw him as a powerful ally in their fight against systemic injustice. Young soldiers looked up to him as a role model, someone who embodied resilience and integrity, even in the face of adversity. At every event, people lined up to thank him, not just for standing up to Hayes, but for using his platform to amplify voices that often went unheard. One of Reed's most impactful initiatives was the creation of a mentorship program aimed at young people from marginalized communities, called Pathways to Leadership. The program provided guidance, resources, and opportunities for underrepresented youth to pursue careers in fields like law enforcement, the military, and government. Reed believed that representation mattered, not just in numbers, but in influence. By empowering the next generation of leaders, he hoped to create a future where incidents like the one at the gas station would become unthinkable. Meanwhile, the FBI struggled to rebuild trust after the Hayes scandal. The reforms announced in the wake of the trial were met with cautious optimism. Mandatory diversity training programs were rolled out nationwide, and independent oversight committees were established to review cases of alleged misconduct. While some praised these efforts as steps toward progress, others argued that real change required more than policy updates. It demanded a cultural shift within the agency. For Agent Daniel Hayes, life behind bars was a stark contrast to the career he once cherished. Initially resistant to self-reflection, Hayes eventually began writing letters to Reed and others affected by his actions. In these letters, he expressed regret, acknowledging the harm he had caused. Some dismissed his apologies as insincere attempts to salvage his reputation, while others saw them as signs of genuine remorse. Regardless of his intentions, Hayes's case served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that unchecked prejudice could destroy lives and careers. Hayes's imprisonment also sparked debates about rehabilitation versus punishment. Should individuals like Hayes be given a chance to redeem themselves, or should they face lifelong consequences for their actions? These questions divided public opinion, reflecting broader societal struggles with forgiveness and accountability. For Reed, the answer lay somewhere in between. "I don't hate Hayes," he once said during an interview, "but forgiving him doesn't mean excusing what he did. It means holding him accountable while leaving room for growth, for him and for all of us." As the years passed, the incident at the gas station faded from headlines, but its legacy endured. It inspired legislative changes, including stricter laws governing the use of firearms by law enforcement officers and increased funding for bias training programs. Schools incorporated discussions about systemic racism into their curriculums, encouraging students to think critically about privilege and inequality. Even workplaces began reevaluating their policies, striving to create environments where everyone felt valued and respected. For Reed, the journey wasn't without challenges. There were moments when the weight of what had happened threatened to overwhelm him. Late at night, he sometimes replayed the confrontation in his mind, wondering if there was anything he could have done differently, but he reminded himself that he had acted with dignity and grace throughout the ordeal. He hadn't let anger consume him, and he hadn't allowed hatred to define his response. Instead, he chose to channel his pain into something positive, a mission to build bridges and foster understanding. One of the most poignant moments came years later, when Reed received an unexpected letter. It was from Lisa Martinez, the gas station attendant who had witnessed the standoff. In her note, she thanked Reed for inspiring her to speak out against injustice. "That night changed me," she wrote. "Before, I thought staying quiet was the safest option. But seeing how you handled everything made me realize that silence only perpetuates the problem. Now I'm volunteering with organizations that fight for equality. Thank you for showing me the power of courage." Reed read the letter with tears in his eyes. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light could emerge. The incident at the gas station had been traumatic, yes, but it had also sparked a chain reaction of awareness and action. People from all walks of life had been moved to examine their own biases, challenge oppressive systems, and work toward a fairer world. As Reed reflected on his journey, he thought about the lessons he had learned. One of the most important was the value of accountability, not just for others but for oneself. He recognized that no one was immune to prejudice, including himself. What set people apart was their willingness to confront it, learn from it, and grow. Another lesson was the importance of community. Reed knew he couldn't have navigated the aftermath of the incident alone. It was the support of friends, family, colleagues, and strangers that kept him grounded and hopeful. By the time Reed retired from active duty, he had earned countless accolades, not just for his military service but for his advocacy work. Yet, he remained humble, always deflecting praise onto those around him. "This isn't about me," he would say. "It's about all of us working together to make things right." His retirement ceremony was attended by hundreds, including many whose lives he had touched. Among them was Tyler Jenkins, the young soldier who had intervened on that fateful night. Jenkins approached Reed with a smile, shaking his hand firmly. "You've inspired so many of us, sir," he said. "Thank you for leading by example." Reed smiled back, his eyes glistening with emotion. "No, thank you," he replied. "If it weren't for people like you standing up when it matters most, none of this would have been possible." Years later, historians would look back on the incident at the gas station as a turning point, a moment when the nation confronted its flaws and committed to doing better. It wasn't a perfect resolution, far from it, but it was a start, and sometimes that was enough. For General Marcus Reed, the man at the center of it all, the experience had been transformative. It had tested his strength, challenged his beliefs, and ultimately reaffirmed his faith in humanity. As he sat on his porch one evening watching the sun dip below the horizon, he felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he knew that as long as people continued to stand up for justice, there was hope for a brighter future. And so the story of the decorated Army general and the rogue FBI agent became more than just a headline. It became a symbol of resilience, accountability, and the enduring pursuit of equality. It reminded everyone that courage, integrity, and compassion are essential, not just in moments of crisis, but in shaping a fairer, more equitable world. And, as people moved forward, they carried with them the lessons learned from a true life story that began with fear and ended with hope.